In this video, we're going to go over all important built-in object methods. With each method, I'm going to give you a useful example of use. So, we already mentioned, objects in JavaScript are collections of key-value pairs, and we can have properties and methods in there. But did you know that all objects in JavaScript descend from the parent object constructor? And that object constructor has many built-in methods we can use and access to make working with individual objects straightforward. That object constructor, and like any constructor, starts with a capital letter O. In this case, this is our object constructor. With arrays, we had a lot of methods we could use. With objects, that's not going to be the case. We only have a few. Unlike array methods, such as for example sort, reverse, map, or any other, they are used on array instance. That means that we actually have to create an array like this. Const arr is equal to array, and now we can actually use the push method or any other method. Object methods are used directly on the object constructor and use the object instance as parameter. This is also known as a static method. So in this video, we're going to go over most important static object methods. First one is object.keys. Object.keys creates an array containing the keys of an object. For example, let's say that you have an object that looks like this. You have all the employees. It has boss is Michael, secretary Pam, sales is Jim, and accountant is Oscar. So now, let's say that you only want to find out about all different positions that the company has, like boss, secretary, sales, and accountant. You're not concerned with who is working in a specific position. In that case, you can use object.keys. Let's see how. We can say const, and let's name it positions. Positions can be equal to object.keys. That is the new method we are learning, and then in there, you have to provide that specific object, in our case employees. Now, if we console log positions, let's see what we get. You can see we get back an array that contains all these positions nicely sorted in an array. We have boss, secretary, sales, and accountant. For that, we use object.keys. That means that basically object.keys transformed all the keys of an object and put them in the array. Now, let's move to the second one in our list, and that is object.values. Object.values creates an array containing the values of an object. So far, we've been getting the keys. In this case, we're getting the values. So let's say that we have an object that looks like this. We have a session. Most likely someone logged in on some web page, and then we get all of these information. So we get an ID of 1, time, device, and browser. Now, let's say that we are not concerned with these. We don't need to know the ID, time, device, browser. We only need the values for these. So now we can use object.values. For that, we can say const values, or let's say session information or session info, and now we can make that equal to object.values. As the situation was with the last one, in that object values, we have to pass that original object. Now, let's console log that session info. If we do that, you can see we get back an array with all these values. So when to use this? Well, there's no specific situation. There will be some cases where you're giving the object, but you only need to get the keys or only get the values. In that case, use either one of these methods, values for the values, and then object.keys for keys. But there's also going to be a situation where you need to get both keys and values from an object, but in two separate arrays. In that case, we can use object entries. Object entries creates a nested array of key value pairs of an object. So let's see how that looks like. Let's say that we have an object that's going to be called operating system. It's going to have a name, version, and a license. Now, what can we do with that object using the entries? That's going to be const entries is equal to object.entries, and then in there, as we always do, we pass in that operating system right there. More specifically, that specific object we want to work with. Now, let's console log the entries and see what we are working with. If we do that, it's going to look weird at first, so let's expand it. We have one array that contains 3 different arrays. And what do these arrays contain? Well, each one has a key and a value stored in a new array. So we have name and Ubuntu stored in one array, version and then the version stored in the other one, and then the license and open source stored in the third one. Basically, each key and value pair gets stored in a new array. Now that we have these key and value pairs, we can loop through them using the for each and then get the value. If we do this using just the basic for each, where we get the entry of that specific array, the first thing in a nested array is going to be the key, and the second thing in the nested array is going to be the value. We simply console log them, and then you get something like this. You can see it looks like an object. Next one on our list is object.freeze. Object.freeze prevents modification to properties and values of an object and prevents properties from being added or removed from an object. Let's take this situation for example. We have a const user object. Let's take this situation for example. We have an object called user that has the username and password. Now, we never want to change that username. It's always going to stay like that. That's our admin user. So how can we freeze this object? How can we make it not change? Well, we can create a new variable called frozen user, or you don't have to use this. You can use literally anything. In this case, maybe using the admin would be right. And then in there, you can use that object.freeze. And you simply pass in there the object you want to freeze. In this case, our user object. Now, if you do that, and then you try changing something like admin.password to, let's say, 123.123.123, and then admin.username to simply test, now you try changing that admin and see if that's gonna work. As you can see, properties remain the same. That means that no one can change the admin. In the example above, we try to override it with test and then 11123, but all properties remain the same. Finally, we have a method that is extremely similar to object.freeze. If you only want to prevent new properties from being added to an object, but you want to allow modifications of existing properties, then you can use object.seal. Let's use the same example. Let's say that we have our user, which has the username of John, password of 123.123, and then we simply want to seal it. So that's gonna be const new user, for example, is equal to object.seal. In there, we pass in our original object, which is the user, and now let's try changing some of the properties. For example, new user, that password, and let's do test123. But now let's also try adding a new property. For example, new user, that active is going to be equal to true. We are adding a new property. Now, if we console log the new user, let's see what's going to happen. You can see definitely the password changed from 123.123 to test123, but the new active property wasn't added. And that happened because the object was sealed. In conclusion, objects have many useful methods to help us modify, protect, and iterate through them. In this video, we'll learn how to take the keys and/or values of an object, and finally freeze and seal an object. Of course, array methods are much more used. If you're still a bit confused and don't know when to use these methods you just saw for objects, that's completely normal. To be completely honest with you, they are not used all that much in real world. On the other hand, array methods are used always. So if you don't understand these fully, or if you have a hard time remembering them, that's fully okay. I would just say be good with array methods. That's going to help you a lot more. With objects, the only thing you really have to know is how to access and change properties using the dot notation and the square brackets notation.